Hello, everybody, and welcome to the channel. My name is Pastor Siri. I'm a Lutheran pastor and a spiritual seeker. And one of the things I've noticed as I look out onto our landscape in the last few years is how there seem to be so many different kinds of Christianity and people of faith in general, regardless of whether you're a Christian or not. You've got more conservative parties, you've got more progressive parties, and then you have people who've abandoned religion altogether. And everybody's really judgmental of each other. And in the last week in the news, we just had the inauguration of President Trump here in the United States. And we had the bishop, the Episcopalian bishop, who gave this sermon that ended with a plea for mercy. It revealed, with all of the conversation that's been happened, what feels like two very different kinds of Christianity. But in reality, and there's so much we could talk about here, I want to just discuss the stages of faith and how it is that we, in general, regardless of your faith background, land in such very different places, and how it can be so hard for us to talk to each other. So, take a listen. So I recently learned about something called the stages of faith. So Professor James Fowler, who was an American theologian, he taught theology and human development at Emory University. And he put together stages of faith that he was able to observe. And it made quite a splash because for some people it made so much sense as to why we believe things differently than we do. And for other people it felt a little threatening because they saw almost like a rank. Where are you hierarchically on this stage of development? So it's not meant to be that, but it can really help us to explain and describe what naturally happens in terms of what from when we're born, and the progression that we might experience in our life. So first of all, there's like a stage zero, and stage zero, really not much happens. You don't really have faith. You are too small. You barely speak your language, if at all. You're just absorbing. But like other developmental stages have understood, this could be huge for you to deeply subconsciously understand if you're safe in this world or not. Then we get to stage one. This is between about the ages of 2 to 6. It's called the intuitive faith stage. And this is going to be a stage in which everything is super, super literal. You're not really going to question absolutely anything. And you can have some really magical beliefs. You're organizing your experience in the best way that you can with speech and with basic thought patterns. An example of this might be when I was a little girl, maybe 5 years old. I was visiting some friends. Now, when I was little, I lived in Tanzania. And so we visited the United States on furlough every once in a while. So the United States, for the most part, was a very different place for me. And we were in Wisconsin visiting my cousin, and there was going to be a tornado, possibly. But I heard tomato. And so I asked a little bit more about what this meant. And the descriptions that were used of like this big thing that kind of comes from the skies, in my mind, I looked out the window and was looking for a giant tomato to come stepping over houses. And in my childlike mind, this was completely plausible. Absolutely no question in my mind that this was possible. This is that childlike faith that's super, super naive and doesn't even fully understand the way the world works. You just believe things in a very, very, very simple way. So if you're presented with any sort of faith structure, you're going to 100% buy what it is your parents and your teachers and your pastors are telling you. So regardless of what faith you're in, even if you're not in a faith, you're going to just completely believe what you're taught, and there's no question about it. But then as you mature and you get to about the age 6, 7 through 11, this is called the mythical literal faith. Now you're starting to formulate things a little bit better. You're making meaning. You are able to put things together and understand things in a better, deeper way, but you're still very literal. I remember when I was a new pastor, I was doing a children's sermon and I brought a plant. And I thought this would be a really great analogy, and it was for adults. But I brought this plant and I sat it down and I said, we are like this plant. And there was this little boy who was like 7 years old, and he looked at me and he went, huh? He had no idea what I was talking about. I talked about the leaves being attached to the stem, and, I'm sure I used Jesus or God or, community, all sorts of, I don't remember what I talked about, but the point was the kid was lost because all he could do was think about the fact that I said we look like a plant. And there was nothing in his brain that was okay with that. Like, it just was not right. And so we can see that where before the age of 12, there are some people's, all of our brains cannot understand something abstract. So this could be true if we're talking about the Bible and we are preaching that Jesus has parables and that this shouldn't be taken literally, that this is an analogy. There's a certain depth in looking at the variety of what's presented in the Bible, of poetry and different kinds of literature, apocalyptic literature, gospel literature. Like, there's really different kinds of things in the Bible, and that could be really hard to sort out when you're young. As a young person, you're just going to take everything at face value, and that's normal. And then a shift happens around the age of 12. We know this from brain science, and yet it doesn't happen to absolutely everybody. Not everybody is able to make the shift from a literal thinker into an abstract thinker. But for those who do, we get to stage 3. This is called the synthetic or the conventional faith. And this happens between the age of 12 and 18. This is also when a lot of confirmation and youth group classes might be happening because so much is shifting and changing in a youth's brain and their body. They're going through puberty, hormones are flooding, all sorts of new information is happening. And this is the first time in which they're starting to question the things that seemed so solid before. The ability of the brain to see gray and to see nuance and to see the abstract in ways they couldn't before, you begin to ask questions. And this can be a very frightening time for some people. Now, in some really conservative churches, they are going to really try to protect this stage and try to make sure that the questions that you're asking are answered in a way that kind of keep you in a stage 2 sort of black and white faith. There may be a lot of pressure for you to continue to have a more simplistic faith. But as you're questioning your identity, you're questioning family and friends and all sorts of things, if you're in a supportive environment, this can help you to walk through some really deep questions to continue on. But I just want to stop here because this is a really, really important stage. So many people that I know and have had conversations with over the years who came from conservative background entered into this stage 3 and they started to have a faith crisis, as you would expect. They had really good questions. They looked around with their brain and they saw that there were things in the world that were not lining up with what they were taught. They could maybe read the Bible for themselves and they were able to see that there were things in the Bible that seemed different than the black and white that they'd been taught. Now, if you're not in an environment in which questions and curiosity is fostered, this can be a very scary time because you can be blamed and you can be shamed and you can be threatened for asking certain questions in a faith tradition. And that fear is very real. The fear of being excommunicated, the fear of not being loved by your family, the fear of being shunned, the fear of hell. There's a lot of fear and shame that can be used to keep people's brains closed down. But this is where a lot of my friends who are no longer in the church basically booted out. They started to ask questions. They probably didn't have someone who was more mature in their theology to walk them through this. And so they thought it was all BS. This is where I think a lot of people become atheists who were originally people of faith. They very clearly notice, yes, there's contradictions in the Bible. Yes, there are, my friends. You look at the 4 Gospels and you start to notice some really big differences. I've read so many things that atheists have written, and memes and jokes where they're making fun of Christians, pointing out inaccuracies in the Bible. I know. But if you come from a simplistic faith and that is what you believe Christianity is, and that any complexity or any gray or any other ways of thinking are bad or they haven't been shown to you, you're going to think your only option is to believe a sort of black and white version of Christianity and the Bible and the world, or atheism. And I totally get it. It makes sense. I'm not going to go into how there's a way for you to read the Bible or learn about faith that is more complex. That's what all of my videos in some ways are talking about. But the point is, this is the crux. This is the point in which people either revert back to stage 2, yeet themselves out of the church altogether, or they, if they're surrounded by a supportive community that honors questions and curiosities, that's when they can move on to stage 4. Stage 4 is the intuitive reflective stage, and it is about the age of 18 through adulthood. And again, none of these stages mean you actually have to progress through them. This is just sort of a ballpark of the ages. This is where you have asked a lot of questions about God, and you are open to new beliefs. You are open to seeing things from a very different way. You are seeking, and seeking becomes more important than belonging. That's really fascinating, because in the earlier stages, when you're young, belonging is so important. Belonging to your family, belonging to your peer group. Now you're willing to maybe get pushback. You're willing to maybe walk away from a community as you ask deeper questions. And this is where some people do a little bit more of a solo journey. They may start going on spiritual retreats. They may start reading various books and listening to podcasts of things that just have them go deeper than maybe what they would experience in established religion. This is why I think it's really fascinating. Different Christian denominations, and I'm speaking about Christianity, different Christian denominations and churches might have a stage that they mostly are staying at. And a lot of conservatives are going to stay around the stage of 2. But there are more progressive churches that know that you're going to start out at 2, but are there to help you through 3 and into 4. And they're going to be there to provide book clubs and Bible studies and spiritual retreats that allow people to question, that allow people to learn about world and religion and spirituality that is way beyond the narrow confines of childhood. And this is where you start to get the conservatives and the progressives that don't understand each other. Because the progressives have grown out of certain stages and they see that there's a lot of gray in the world. They see there's complexity. They're able to look at a Bible verse and find 15 different interpretations or go, you know what? That particular verse sounds like a scribe altered it. And it's doesn't have to necessarily ruin their faith or mean the entire Bible is null and void. It just means they're allowed and able to see that the Bible is filled with, it's a human document that's filled with a lot of stuff that's happened over the years, and it's evolved and people have added and they've taken out. And so you do your best as a community to discern where the wisdom is, and you decide together what is not important and what doesn't seem to hold up over time. But that's terrifying to people who are more conservative. They don't understand that level of conversation. And that's where you get more black and white thinking of like, the Bible is inerrant, every part of it is true, there are no contradictions, and any sort of evidence of the contrary is like a da-da-da-da. You don't want to hear it, or you're accused of being the devil or Satan because you're causing them to doubt their simplistic childhood faith. So it's very understandable that there are full-grown adults out there who are going to church in a stage 2 church, and they have been taught, and maybe their brains themselves have not been able to shift over into stage 3 and 4. No judgment, it's just biology. Or they've just been encouraged through fear, shame, and threatening to stay in stage 2. Well, surely then they're either not going to understand progressives or they're going to be terrified and threatened by progressives because that is potentially shaking the faith that they've been told is correct. And doubt is a really bad thing. And that's the path to atheism. That's the path to hell. That's going to hell in a handbasket. And of course, they don't want that. Now, there's more than stage 4. Stage 5 is called the conjunctive faith. And this is where you have asked some really deep questions. You have formed your own faith. You've done your own work. You basically have taken spiritual authority from the church and from the priest and everything, and you've taken it back into yourself. So this is a very wise position. I think there's a lot less people in stage 5 than maybe we would realize. I would really love to think I'm in stage 5, but I don't know, because part of what I do understand is this is where humility starts to come in. You realize all that you don't know. Through maybe meditation or your life experience as you get older, you start to realize you know a lot less than you think you know, and you're way more open to the shifts and changes of life, and that God and faith is so much more complex than anything you realize your brain can actually understand. And you're okay with that. You're looking at life and religion and yourself in a new way, and there's more of a universality that comes to be. So this is why I can say that, yes, I'm a Christian and I'm a Lutheran pastor, but I see such beautiful connection with all sorts of different faiths and spirituality. I have no need to convert. I have no need to uproot myself and replant myself in someone else's soil. Rather, if you look at this beautiful plant behind me, I'm planted firmly in my Christian soil, and my branches are going out and exploring and learning from others in a way that feels enriching and enlivening and comfortable. Well, it's uncomfortable at times, but overall I'm able to integrate that, and I just grow and get bigger and am more comfortable reaching out further and further. And that to me is so life-giving because it takes away a lot of the false boundaries that we put up. Lastly, stage 6 is like a universalizing, an enlightenment. And this happens probably way late in adulthood. And I'm going to say, people like Jesus and the Buddha and really, really powerful saints and mystics, and probably, honestly, millions of women and men across the world, quietly, silently, on their own, in every faith and religion, have maybe achieved this. But we just don't always know about them. They are not going to start mega churches. They're probably not going to have a TV show. They may be the kind of person that people are drawn to in such a beautiful way that they end up giving talks, and sometimes we know about them, and sometimes they start some sort of movement. But these are people who see life in such a radically different way. In some ways, they're living in the kingdom of God all the time. They have seen through the veil of all of our illusion and our delusion and the painful stories that so many of us have created, including the painful stories of religion. And they see through to something else that is way less particular, to something that is more universal. I've been listening to Eckhart Tolle in the car lately, and he's the one who wrote The Power of Now. And every time I listen to him, I'm listening to someone who has seen something in this world. He had a very powerful spiritual experience in his early adulthood, and that has propelled him to be the kind of teacher that he is today. But he's an incredibly humble, slow, gentle man who behaves in this world in a way that's so different. He's in the world, but he's living and reacting and not reacting, responding. He's living and responding and making choices in ways that are very different from the rest of us. And so that's this beautiful process that starts from utter reliance and not a brain thought going on in your head, moving through learning about our world to asking questions about our world, and then hopefully getting the support you need to move through so that you can formulate your own faith, your own authority, and in the process, start to reach out and find something deeper and more true and mystical that's actually kind of hard to explain. What's interesting, as I'm wrapping up here too, is that I believe Jesus was in this stage 6. And he was having this experience of oneness with God and with all people. He saw clearly reality in a way that's different from the rest of us. And so he was doing his best to try to distill that experience down to people who were clearly in way earlier stages. And the parables were meant to be for people in those really early stages as just something to kind of percolate, like a seed that's been planted that might grow into something as they get older. And he was hoping that his disciples were maybe more in the stage 3 and 4 and heading into 5. Unfortunately, the church as a whole, when it came into power in the 4th century, I think reverted back to something much more simplistic, and it was about power and control and black and white. And so the mystical, wide, mature teachings of Jesus, which were available for people, I think, in all stages of their journey to be guided by their heart into their development and their exploration, sort of got confined and trapped into a dogma and a way of thinking with a lot of shame, fear, and control around it. And that's still happening today. So to wrap this up, I guess I would just say, wherever you feel you are on the stage of that, whatever felt like, okay, that's where I am, is where you're supposed to be right now. But if you're ever getting to the point where you feel like you want more, you're seeking, you have questions, there are people who've been there. There are people who can walk you through that. There are spiritual directors and pastors and all sorts of people at spiritual retreats who can guide you and help you move to the next stage. And never forget that ultimately, I believe, the goal is, after we've learned what we can from authorities out there, we really take back and we find our own inner authority and control. That's the goal, is for us to know for ourselves what is true. And that's something we can only ultimately discover for ourselves. We're introduced to a lot of stuff when we're young, and then it's for us to find what is true. We can't convince other people to be in the stage we're in. You can't shame people to be in the stage. You can't make anyone understand what they can't understand. It just is what it is. But maybe this will allow you to have some more compassion for what other people might be experiencing. All right, until next time, bye-bye.